Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from dcx, and welcome to episode 263, where we're going to talk about how to tell your story in your portfolio or an interview. And we do have a special guest joining us in just a moment, but before we bring that person in, I just want to remind everybody to check out dcx.to. That will give you all the links to join our community. And of course, also check out on the dcx.com homepage, the registration for our new conference is open. It is May 2025, and it's going to have CX, UX, information, dealing with bad workplaces, personal development, and career shifts. So we've got all kinds of interesting work and non-work topics. Welcome, Diana and Ana Lucia. So if you have questions about how to tell your story in your portfolio or in an interview, put it up. We want to know it. But let's bring in our super special guest, and that is the always fantastic Stef Walter. Stef, tell us about you.
Hi, it's been a while. My name is Stephanie Walter. I'm a UX researcher and apparently strategist now. And I've been working in enterprise UX for a couple of years now. And I'm mostly specialized in enterprise products and inclusive design accessibility.
Excellent. Yes. And people should absolutely be following you everywhere. LinkedIn, where else can they follow you?
LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Mastodon. Bye X.
Fair enough. So we wanted to talk today about some things to share around telling the story of a project, even a disaster project, because we have to think about what a hiring manager might be looking for. And I get asked a lot of times, what do I put in my portfolio or talk about in my interview if the project was chaotic or a mess or didn't end very well? Steph, do you want to give some advice there first? For chaos projects?
Chaos projects. I mean, I don't think 100% of the project is always chaos. So I would like people often think that in a portfolio you need to put the whole project, and then we end up with these gigantic case studies. And sometimes you're like, yeah, maybe the project was chaotic, but did you have a win? Did you have something in this whole chaos that went well? And can you present that thing that went well, or that thing where it was very interesting, where you have a lot of things to say, where you have a lot of data, where you basically, the idea of a portfolio is to shine, to show your experience, but also to let people kind of give them a first impression of who you are, how you work. So even if the whole thing was chaos, is there like one small part, one one little light in the whole darkness? And if you can find this one, then I think it's okay to not present the whole project, especially if it's a big one. Then just present one part that went well. That could be an idea. So find the wins inside the chaos, I would say. What would you do?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the bottom line is you did a project, and if there was chaos, you might need to be a little bit honest about it, but you don't have to throw anybody under the bus. You don't have to say, and my product manager, Steph, was terrible. You can just say, unfortunately, there were some time and budget blockers. You don't have to name names, and you can still tell the story of what happened, because most hiring managers have been there before. They know that projects have a lot of chaos, conflict, disorganization. So you don't want to make any particular person look bad, but you can still tell that story. And like Steph said, focus on what you did. What did you do it? How did you do it? Why did you do it? And were there any wins in there? But I certainly have projects in my portfolio that were messy and ended badly. And that's what happened. That's the story I have to tell.
I have a project where it's weird because it was very chaotic, and then I switched mission because I'm a consultant, so I'm sent to different clients. And when I say I was I switched clients. Last day we had a lunch, and I had like the head of the project who came to me was like, "I'm so thankful for you because even in the chaos, you were able to break a couple of silos, and for that I think." We all need to thank you. So here was my light, like in the whole chaotic part of this thing, like the one thing I was able to work on, and one thing I was able, even if it was not like completely breaking the silos, like we started breaking a couple of silos. We started having people talk to each other, which was also one of the reasons of the chaos. Like chaos was there because people didn't talk to each other. So yeah, we started like planting some little seeds, and a couple of years after, someone went to work for them, and they wanted to talk to me because they knew me, and Luxembourg is very small. It's like, oh yeah, I heard so many things about you. So the whole like starting to break silos and bring people together, that stuck around actually. So yeah, then you focus on that and not the rest of the chaos.
Yeah, excellent. And hello, howdy, Faye. So I wanted to put a graphic up on the screen because I had made a couple of notes about some things that you can always tell in your story, whether or not there was chaos. You can talk about what were the goals and the outcomes that the project had. And of course, why were you doing the project? Why did this even exist? Who were the key stakeholders involved? Who was on your team? Did you have any influence on the stakeholders? Sometimes, as Steph just pointed out, even in a chaotic project, you can be that person who has the good meetings or the good data that somebody listens to. So did any of your work help with strategy, decisions, directions, priorities, designs, or even just keeping people from making mistakes? What were some of the discovery or research or design methods that you used, and why? What artifacts did you produce to bring life to whatever you were doing? How was collaboration approached with other teams? I think hiring managers always want to hear about collaboration and teamwork, even if there are pros and cons, like this aspect went well, this didn't. And how did you approach measuring success? Anything you want to add to that, Steph? Any suggestions of what to make sure you tell in your story?
That's a lot, I would say. I would say maybe if you could also say, like, if you acknowledge that things didn't go well, maybe you could say, let's say they didn't want you to do user research, and this is the reason why it didn't go well. Maybe you could say, like, okay, reflecting upon that, I think we should have done this like that and that, So kind of having a reflection after you've listed all of that, saying, okay, what would I have changed if I had a magic wand, like this is not how I want to work. This is how I would prefer to work. I don't know if you can put that in the interview, in the portfolio directly, but maybe it's a good point when you're talking about this experience during the interview, saying like, okay, this didn't go well, but this is how I would have liked this to work, what I would have preferred to do, or like, yeah, I would have preferred to interview 5 people here at least instead of 0, something like that, to show that, okay, it didn't go well, but you have ideas again to improve.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think wherever you can work in a gentle, here's how I would have done it or should have done it, or here's what I would have done if I had had more time, budget, access to users, whatever it might be, because then I can say, sometimes I look at someone's portfolio and I see that the chaos, and I say, is this someone's preferred process, or were they kind of stuck doing this? And we need our storytelling to help people understand this is kind of what I got stuck doing, and that I think it would have been better if I had been able to do XYZ. So I definitely agree in trying to find a way to say that. We had a question go by. Ana Lucia asks, what kind of answer would be acceptable when interviewers ask a question about a time when we had a conflict or problem and how we solved them? Steph, any advice on answering that popular interview question on how you resolved a conflict?
First, it assumes you resolved it. So I love how the question is already biased by the interviewer. It's like, how did
Leading
you resolve it?
question.
We didn't. I left. This is why I'm interviewing for your company. No, joke aside, I would like try to find one that you resolve. And the thing is, I would be honest. I've interviewed a couple of people, and you can see when people are lying. You can see when they are all of a sudden start like losing their words or trying to make something up. So I would be honest. Like, if it was resolved, explain how it was resolved. If it was not, then explain how it was not resolved and why. Or is it like an hypothetical question?
No,
I don't
usually
understand.
they
Is
want to
the
hear
in
a
the
real. Yeah, this is pretty common
yeah.
in interviews I've had where they'll say, "Oh, tell me about a time there was a conflict on your team and what you did to improve or resolve that." And you have to kind of think of a time when somebody disagreed or didn't want to do something or something like that. I do try to find real stories that happened to me, but I try to make sure to tell them in a way where I'm not trying to make one person look really bad, and sometimes that's hard, and I have to just say, unfortunately I had a disagreement with the product manager about the designs. The product manager wanted to use their designs. I had my own designs. I was the UX designer on the project. The product manager went forward with the designs, and when we tested them, they tested poorly. And at that point, I was able to explain this to the product manager, and they had to choose whether they were going to try again with my designs or something else. And, sometimes that story ends well and sometimes it doesn't. I've had product managers who've said, yeah, okay, let's go with your design. And I've had product managers who've said, no, keep my designs. I'm very happy with them. And I just have to say, I do what I can to bring, so what are they listening for? They're listening for, hopefully I didn't cause the problem. I'm trying to de-escalate the problem, and I'm trying to bring in the user and data where I can so that it's not my opinion versus somebody else. That's what I think. Oh, we've got another. Anything you want to add, Steph?
I forgot.
Forgot. Okay. Always come to my show with a pen and scrap paper, and then you can write it down while I'm yapping my head off. We have a new question. This is from Daniel on LinkedIn. And Daniel says, great to see your honest take on design. Being transparent without coming across as negative or worrying about perception is huge. I'd be interested in how you see people actually engaging with case studies or portfolios. Are they really being read or just skimmed? Steph, do you have a sense if the HR people or recruiters or hiring managers are really looking at our portfolios?
I think it depends how many candidates you have. Like, usually what we do is we do a first selection, HR selection based on the resume, and then to see if they fit, we want a certain number of years of experience. Let's say we want 2 languages, something like that. And then once we have a first round, we check the portfolios. But no, we are not reading, like, if you have 10 case study, I'm not going to read all 10 case study. I will for sure be skimming. I would be interested into, again, understanding how you work. I do not care usually about Figma skill, Action skill, or whatever, because I think like technical skills, like tool skill, can be taught pretty easily. So I'm more interested into really understanding the process. How does that person work, and will they be a good fit for the team? That's mostly. So I need that kind of information in the portfolio, the kind of information that let me understand your process. And also the thing is, there's often, especially with like students who are fresh out of bootcamp, is always the same structure. So I'm sorry, but I had a candidate who was doing some, how do you call it, like personas. And when I asked him, like, how did you build a persona? How many people did you interview? He's like, oh, no, and we just like build them like that out of what we imagined from the user. I was like, okay, then maybe do not put that into your portfolio. And I know like Persona is a tool that is taught a lot. But for me, it's kind of like either you really, really have a very strong experience with that and you have a lot of users and you have a lot of data to build strong personas, or they will be rubbish most of the time. So
For
my
sure.
advice here is just because you were taught a method at school doesn't mean you must use it. And
So
like, be
true.
honest about your process. If you didn't use one method, it's fine. We just need to understand how you work. The rest is gonna be okay.
Yeah, and to jump off of what Stephanie is saying, and then I'll also jump back to the question above. Especially when people have gone to programs or boot camps or schools and they think they have to throw every technique they learned at a project, sometimes I'll say to that person, why did you make an empathy map? And they just don't know. They just thought, well, doesn't every project get an empathy map? And it's like, well, we're in the business of critical thinking. So if you're going to do something, you should probably have a good reason to do it. I mean, if your coworkers asked you, why did you make that thing? You shouldn't be like, I always make things. Like, you should have a good reason for stuff. And so then I might say to someone, after you made that empathy map, how did you use that information later in your project? And they'll be like, I never looked at the empathy map again. And I'll be like, well, then why did you make it? And so I think it's important to be able to speak to why you did or didn't do something, because not all, but many jobs want to understand your thinking. As for the original question about, are people really reading the portfolios or are they just skimming them? As Steph said, it depends. I agree that very often if I am looking at candidates, I'll go through one case study fairly completely. I'll skim it, but I'll try to go through the whole thing and get the story of the project. But I've heard stories of hiring managers who spend 60 seconds skimming a portfolio, 90 seconds, because they have so many candidates, they can't read through the whole thing. And so they are just sometimes they're just looking at the top and seeing what happened, or they're looking at the bottom and seeing how it ended. Everybody's got different techniques. So I think the best you can do is tell the right story for your target audience, and just know they're not going to read every word. They're hopefully going to pick up on different elements of your story, and that's part of why the visual hierarchy is so important. Design your page. Ana Lucia says, I notice many people get out of university and other courses without understanding the why of things. They use templates or whatever they were told to do, and that's it. Very true. I wanted to take a quick moment to plug a couple of things. For example, I have a video on YouTube already about confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements around portfolios. This is a very common question I get. My work is confidential. My work is under NDA. What can I show? What can't I show? Is a password enough? Is a password not enough? I'm not going to answer all that here. I've already answered it. So please go to YouTube and just write dcx confidentiality. That's all you have to do. And you're going to see a thing that says confidentiality, NDAs, and portfolios. So I am not going to answer that here. We already have an entire thing on it. Also, and I know Steph had this in our notes for the show, anonymizing things. That definitely plays into, I talk about that also in my video on confidentiality. But Steph, what do you want to add about in your, either in the portfolio or in the interview telling the story, what should we anonymize?
I would say name of the client for sure if you cannot talk about it. Also change the color code if you can, so that they're like, oh, this is totally the color of Spotify. So if you don't want to have issues, I would change the name and the color. Also, I think you can be very generic without being specific. I don't think you need to have the name if you're not allowed to do it. And then I would focus on what did you do. Again, it's about you. It's not that much about that company. Or so even if you cannot talk about the company, you can still explain projects without breaching the NDA, and what did you do? What was your work? What was your role? How, again, did you work for that? So I have an NDA and I cannot talk about the company, but I can tell that I worked for finance, and I can explain that I have experience with security pages and things like that. Giant portfolio, a lot of zeros, and I can explain. Because it's finance. There's no way anyone can guess the company I worked for just by giving information about, okay, it was a finance project. As long as I don't give you the country or something like that, there's tons of finance projects about securities and things like that. So I can always explain what did I do for them. Of course, I will not be able to show the mockups, but at least I can still talk about my impact, how we improved things for the users there, things like that.
Sorry, I'm just typing some things and organizing behind the scenes. Yes, thank you. And oh gosh, something you said made me think of something, and now I didn't write it down. What was I going to say? Well, let's see. Well, while I try to think about that, hey, everybody, don't forget to join our online community. You can find it at dcx.to. We have a growing and active Discord community. Our Slack community is unfortunately nearly dead, but Discord is happening. We hope to see you there. And don't forget my new conference for everybody is coming in May, and registration is open. You can find a link from the dcx.com homepage. Check out the conference. It's totally remote and designed to be totally affordable. Let's see. Any other questions from people who are joining live? Let me also check some of the notes Steph and I made beforehand. Oh, yeah, we were talking about making things anonymous. And I was going to say that, again, a lot of this stuff is in my NDA's video, but in general, you probably do have to keep certain things confidential until they're public. If your work has gone public, if this has shipped, if people can sign up for this and use this, it is no longer confidential. Now, that doesn't mean you tell all of the behind the scenes gossip, but it means you can show some of your screens and some of your work. Now, speaking of screens and work, I also want to remind people that in many cases, the work that you've done is confidential until it's not. It's confidential until it's released to the public and they can see it. But it can be a good idea while you are still at that job to grab a couple of screenshots and have a couple of things saved to your personal computer. Yes, later on you might need to do what Steph said and remove names and logos and colors and identifying information. You might even need to rebuild it in Figma or Axure or whatever so that it's anonymous. And I've done that before too. Like Steph's story, I had a banking client and they felt their project was incredibly confidential, but I wanted to show it. But in reality, it was a pretty generic banking website. And once I took off their name, their logo, their colors, their phone number, their email address, and some other stuff, it really just looked like every other bank that was out there. And so at that point, I felt like I could show this project because nobody would know who it was, and I shouldn't get in trouble for it. But again, you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing. The password protection is not going to be enough if you are sharing secrets. Confidential stuff is secrets. So don't share it. Ana Lucia says, hold on, let me try to read this. One of the things that is usually recommended to add to our portfolio is business impact. But what about if it's a freelance or consulting project? We aren't there to check the impact after we deliver what we had to do. Maybe they acted on it, maybe they didn't. How would you approach that section? I'll start with Steph. Steph, what do you do when you're supposed to explain your impact and you might not know it?
Well, you cannot make up data. So my first advice is do not make up data just because someone told me to put the business impact in there. What?
People are telling me
Seriously?
to make it up because they're saying no one will ever know. You go ahead and say this raised something 20%. Nobody will know,
Mm.
so go ahead and lie.
No, very bad idea. Especially like if we would never do that in Luxembourg because it's very, very small.
Right.
And if the person is going to check, like, oh, I know someone at that company and I will double check, and like, no, you don't want to be caught being lying to someone. So I would say if you cannot put business impact, maybe again you can use this magic wand saying, okay, I wasn't able to measure business impact, but here is how I would have done it if I had the opportunity to do so. Um, Also, usually at the beginning of the project, you still have business information, KPI, OKR, all of that. So even if you do not have the numbers, you can still maybe communicate about that. So being like transparent, saying, okay, the goal here was to improve that and that. I don't know, to improve retention, for instance. We did user research into that direction. It shipped. I do not have the numbers, but this is still like the premise. This is the business frame I was supposed to work within. So, because usually, even if you do not know the impact at the end of the project, you still have someone who tell you the objective of the project. Like, we want to do that and that. And also, I want to remind people that quantitative numbers is nice. Qualitative is also an impact. So, for
That's right.
instance, I was working on a project where we didn't have quantitative measurement, but we had qualitative. We had some verbatims from the users during usability testing, things like that. So, even if it's not at the end of the project, if you had the occasion to test it and you have a couple of users saying, oh, this is going to save me so much time, that's an impact. That's a business impact. So again, try to reframe it, like hunt down for every single piece of information that could be basically tied to business impact. And remember, it's not just like all the fancy OKR, KPI, and all the acronyms. It's also qualitative. And yeah, user verbatims, I think those count as a qualitative business impact for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Great points, all of them. I think that, and again, that's why this is about storytelling. What is the story? What kind of impact did you have? The impact can be I saved the team time because after testing the designs, we learned that we were going in the wrong direction, or we learned that the designs could be improved. I saved the team time because my research told us some stuff we didn't know and we were able to make better decisions. You can always try to focus on something you did that saved the team time, failure, mistakes, money, customer trust. Okay, you can't quantify these. We don't know how many or how much, but we can say we saved this. Another thing that I did at my last job was when I knew my contract was ending, I went to some of my cross-functional teammates and I asked them for a quote. And I said, is there something that you are comfortable saying about my work on this project that I can put in my portfolio? You can be anonymous. I can just put your job title. You can put your name if you would like to. But, is there something you're comfortable saying? And I think I got 5 or 6 quotes. Yeah, I got a business analyst, and I got a project manager, and I got my manager, and I got a technical product manager. And again, if someone's just skimming my portfolio, maybe they don't really read that. But if they wanted to, they could stop and see, oh, wait, there is impact here. All these people are saying nice things about Debbie's work. And so even that might be impact. These people said, I made the project better. Sure, there isn't a number associated with that, but I think there are multiple ways to try to show that we had impact, even if this is about storytelling. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Steph.
No, I agree. I think it's such a nice idea. We did that when so basically I worked as a consultant for a bank, and after 2 months they fired 60% of consultants. So basically they fired my whole team except internal people. Well, they fired air quote because we were consultants, so we were not fired from our consulting company. We were
Right.
just like losing the clients. And what we ended up doing is like we recommended each other on LinkedIn. So everyone went to LinkedIn and recommended the other people. It was so cute and so nice to have all of those things. So yeah, before leaving, if you know you're gonna leave, I love the idea of grabbing like quotes, grabbing feedback, grabbing LinkedIn recommendations also from people you worked with, especially if it went well. It's a little bit more complex if it was chaotic, but still, often the chaos was not always at your team level, you know. So yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, another great point there, that even if you can get LinkedIn recommendations, that you can still. I've gotten LinkedIn recommendations and then I copy and paste them into portfolio projects or sometimes my resume, just to say, hey, humans like me. Here's some nice things people said about me, and especially if you can connect it to that project. I want to talk for a moment, Steph. We were talking before about, in many cases, we're only looking at one case study in someone's portfolio. Then I sometimes get the question, well, if people are only looking at one, how many should I have in my portfolio? I know I've got my own answer to that. What is your answer for how many case studies should you have in your portfolio?
I would say it depends on the job, and I would say I'd rather have only a few, but really qualitative, well-written ones. Also, I'm laughing because I had a fight with the previous boss on that, where basically the project page of the agency, I was calling that the symmetry of graveyard of past clients, where they were listing all the clients. They would never clean it up. So it would like grow, 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 grow. And like 10 years later, we still had case studies for things we did 10 years before that. But you know, like the design was outdated, everything was not up to date anymore. So I would say less is more. Remove everything that is dated, remove everything that you do not want to do. Like I did some designs. I designed logos. I designed illustration. I love doing that on my free time. I do not want to do illustration or logos for a client, so I will not put anything like that on my portfolio. So I would say, and I think it's often when you start, you want to put tons of things, but I would say it's not about the number, it's about the quality and trying to match it. What is your next job? What is your next role? What do you want to do into your next job? Your portfolio is not only a reflection of what you did in the past, but it's also a window into your future, into I want to do that, I want to do more of that, for instance. So I would say if you have 3 case studies, already quite a lot, to be honest. So cut it down and focus on what you're good at, what you want to do, and avoid having super outdated things that don't make sense like 10 years after. That's usually kind of hard.
Yeah, it would be a little wacky for my portfolio to still show I made the bank's first iPad app in 2012. That's probably a little old and crispy at this point. My answer to this tends to be the right number of case studies are the number of case studies that tell your story well. It's harder for some of us who have multiple specialties, like I've done a lot of design, I've done a lot of strategy, and I've done a lot of research. You might want one of those from me, you might want multiple of those from me. So I can't just have 1 or 2 case studies because I'm trying to show stuff that I've done in different, totally different work areas. So that means that my portfolio tends to have more stuff. But that means when you hit my page or landing page, I'm trying to be very clear about what kind of project it is. So that way, if somebody's only interested in my research, they don't get caught up in a strategy project. They don't get caught up in a design project. If someone's looking for leadership and strategy, they're not going to accidentally look at my research work. So I think that you just have to think about how many case studies do I need to tell the story of what I have done and what I can do. And I always recommend that on that page or landing page that people are very clear about what type of work it is and what industry it was for, because sometimes a hiring manager is looking for, did you do research? Yes or no? Which ones of these are research? And do you happen to have any industries that are our industry or close to it? So I think having those right out there on that landing page, and not making people have to click in to see it would be helpful. Oh, I just remembered what I was trying to say 12 minutes ago. Okay, a mistake I see in a lot of portfolios has to do with how people tell the background of the project. And Steph, I would definitely want you to weigh in on this after I tell my story. Sometimes I have seen portfolios that have taken screens and screens. Hey, Solomon. Screens and screens and scrolling, screens and screens to tell me the entire background of the company, everything the company is doing, all of their wonderful missions, and even impact statements about the company. And I'm always like, I just want to understand your work and what this project was. I mean, give me 2 sentences about who this company is so I have a frame of reference, and then just get into why does this project exist and what you were doing. So if you think that the background of the project has to be extensive company history or extensive company bragging or extensive company something, it really doesn't. If you've done a project for a company I've never heard of, give me the 1 or 2 sentence version of who the heck this company is, and then just get into the story. Steph, thoughts on that?
I would say worst case scenario, if the company is public, people can Google it, I do not even explain who some of my clients are. I would just say like, okay, I know not everyone knows that Luxair is the airline in Luxembourg. So I would just likely, yeah, Luxair, Luxembourgish airline. If you want more information, then you can Google it. I usually explain that they have like 2 branches, Luxair and Luxair Tour, because it's important, because in this case study, I explain the complexity of having a multiple brand identity design system. But I'm explaining that because it's related to what I'm explaining later. So I would say give enough context about the company, but give the context that is useful to understand the portfolio. In the case study, sorry. If meaning if you did multiple projects for them, maybe you will describe them in different ways. Because you need to understand that part of this company to understand this part of this case study, etc. So I would say contextualize, and worst case scenario, people can always Google it if they need it.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great idea. That there's not a lot we necessarily need to say. And Ana Lucia's reminding us that if you're under NDA, you're not telling the story of the company anyway. You can't tell us who the company is. Wilson says, yeah, add a hyperlink to Google for them. Right, let me Google that for you. Generally I don't put a lot of links, if any, from my portfolio to outside things. I think given how little time people spend on portfolios, they don't have time to go watch a video of something or play around a prototype or Google stuff. And that's why I'll just give them the 1 sentence version. Arizona State University is a university with 170,000 students that wanted to work on a new internal tool. That's all you need to know. Now, from there, it's the story of me. It's me, the shining star. Solomon says, I'd love to hear your take on a linear versus non-linear storytelling format. I'm hearing more hiring managers say they're tired of seeing portfolios with case studies formatted linearly. Can you give us an example of that? Like, what's a linear story versus non-linear? Like, how are you supposed to tell your story out of order? I usually don't recommend telling a story out of order. So what story would you tell? What order would it go in? Steph, what about you? Do you tell stories in the order in which they happened?
So usually I know people do not read. So it's like, here is the conclusion. Here is how we linearly history, what we did to arrive at it. Here is the conclusion again. I put the conclusion at the beginning and at the end. So I'm sure that if they skim, they have both. And I say the same thing for case studies or for presentation, everything. You need the conclusion at the beginning. Do not worry about spoiling people, it's fine. I really hate when we have a whole presentation and I do not know where it's going, and it's the same for the portfolio. I want to know exactly the end first. problem and your solution, then I will read how you write then, and then I'm more than happy to read again the problem and solution. So I don't know if this means non-linear. Don't start with the context and problem decision.
Yeah, I think Steph's on the right track with this. Yeah, I think that, and also we were talking before about how some hiring managers or HR people might read just the start of the case study or the portfolio project and then make a decision about whether or not they want to meet you. I heard about some hiring managers who scroll to the bottom of the page and look at how the project ended and decide if they want to meet you or not. I don't follow Stephanie's advice, but I think her advice is great. I think other people should follow Stephanie's advice that it's a great idea to put the meatiest, most interesting information about the project, whether that's a conclusion or an impact or an outcome, at the beginning and at the end, because we don't know whether people are going to read some of the beginning and stop or scroll down to the bottom and just read the end. I'm not following that advice, but I do think it's good advice. And so I think that the reality is that we're problem solvers and we're trying to get into other people's brains and figure out what they're likely to do. And if we know they're likely to only read the beginning or they're likely to only read the end, we have to design the page for someone who might never see one of those or the middle or who knows. So I think Steph's idea is best. Groovy question. Any other questions? If there aren't any other questions, we can certainly start to wrap up. Just a reminder that tomorrow is Ask Me Anything. We'll have Dr. Nick as a guest. If you want to send a question ahead of time, there's a link on dcx.to. Make sure you've joined our online community. Our Discord is very active. And check out our upcoming conference. The conference is linked from the dcx.com homepage. It's a 3-day remote event in May. I hope you'll be able to come. Anybody have any other questions or comments on portfolios? And while we wait for those questions, Steph, anything you want to add?
Don't look at my portfolio because I do not follow my own advice. I do not even have a case study, honestly. If I need to, but I have absolute zero time. Also, my portfolio is more for me to sell conferences and workshops than to sell my job. So yeah, don't look at my for advice. Still, like, I have tons of idea how to improve it. I will eventually, but yeah. Like in French, we say les cordonniers sont les moins bien chaussés. Like the shoemaker has the word shoes, something like that.
Yes, we have a phrase like that. Me. Yes. Totally true. Ana Lucia says, I'm not sure how to do a nonlinear case. Adding a summary right on top? Sure. Being all over the place and messing up the sections? Unorthodox. I'm not quite sure that helps. Yeah, in general. Oh, thank you to the follow on Twitch. Thank you. We're also on Twitch. Follow us there. Yeah, Ana Lucia, I don't think that the goal is to have everything out of order and to make it a jumbly mess, but to really just kind of put the end at the beginning and the end at the end, just in case people only look at the top and the bottom. Diana asks, is it okay
to... Same with...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's the same with research paper. Like in the introduction of the research paper, you have the conclusion, then you have the whole paper, and then you have the conclusion again. So it's not
we often
like
have
in
that
the
in
middle,
research.
it's linear.
Research reports. We have the executive summary that gives away all the big spoilers and has the key insights and the actions, and then we get into all of the details. Diana wants to know if it's okay to show case studies if you only have had one client. Steph, what do you think?
You need to start somewhere. So what else are you gonna show first? And again, maybe if you want to have like more substance, did you do multiple things for that client? If you feel like ashamed of having only one case study on your website because it feels a little bit empty, then again, did you do multiple things for this client, for instance? That could be something you can, and then you would like do different case study for different part of what you did for that client. I have like a case study or on one very specific part of one very specific thing I did for one client, for instance. But I do not see a problem of having only one case study if it's a good one. It's about the story, as Debbie was saying, as helping people understand who you are, how you work.
Yeah, totally agree with that. You've got to start somewhere. If you've only had one client or one client that you can show, then you show that. And if you've only had one project with one client, you show that. So I think it's not a contest of how many can you show. Nobody wins because they have 15 projects in their portfolio, because that's 14 a hiring manager isn't going to see. A hiring manager is probably just going to look at one, and if you only have one, it is what it is. And so you just want to focus in and tell a great, compelling story. Deanna says it is one client, but it's lots of different things. Yeah, great. Well, then maybe you have a few case studies where one focused on some emails you did for them, one focused on a website update you did, one focused on some research. You can still break that into multiple case studies, especially since we know that people want to see that you can do different things and they're only going to really look through one thing. Solomon says, what are you guys' thoughts on providing feedback to candidates that fail interviews? I think that's not legal in many places. Steph, what do you know about say you have a candidate and you're going to reject them? And would you tell them why you rejected them? And is it legal for you to tell them why?
I don't know if it's legal. I would definitely not do it during the interview. So I'm a consultant, so often like the candidate comes through consulting companies to the client, and we give a feedback to the consulting agency as to why we didn't want the candidate. So then it's up to them to tell to the candidate why they did not. I would like, honestly, if the candidate cannot contact me directly, but I think it would be nice to know why you were rejected, or like, was it because you didn't fit the profile? Was it a problem with the budget? Sometimes it happens as well. So yeah, I would be okay giving feedback to candidate because I have nothing to hide. There's always like a good reason, and sometimes it's just like, yeah, we had 3 candidates and the last one was better prepared and they matched better the way we work with the team. And so, but there's one candidate I would love to give them feedback because their interview was such a mess that I was feeling very bad for them. So I would like to give them feedback at some point. So if they were to come to me, I would do it.
Yeah, it to me it really depends on the rules of the country or the company. We've had some people say, "Hey, I think in Germany you have to give a reason," and "Hey, I think in my country you can't give a reason." I think so. First of all, you have to go by the rules of the country. You have to go by the rules of your company. In the past, I have generally not given specific feedback, but if someone has asked me for specific feedback, I check with my manager. Can I tell this person why we did not continue with them? And if the manager says, yeah, it's okay to say this and this, then I'll write them back and I'll give that to them. But if the manager says, look, our policy is just to reject people with a generic thank you anyway, then I would have to write back and say, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to provide further feedback for you at this time. If somebody reached out to me directly, like they wrote to me on LinkedIn or they sent me an email and they said, look, I'm just going around the process here, tell me something, I would still go by my country's rules and my company's policy. Even if they tracked me down at my non-work email, even if they ran into me on the street, I would still abide by the policies. So if I can't tell somebody why, then I wouldn't. For what Solomon was saying before, I try not to hold being nervous against people, because everybody's nervous for different reasons.
Yeah.
I don't think being nervous is a reason to reject someone. I think that's a bad reason to reject someone. So that's unfortunate. But I would hate to say to someone, yeah, we're not going to interview you for the job because you were nervous about the interview. Then they're going to be 5 times as nervous next time. Like that doesn't that's not friendly. So that is not good. So yeah. Diana says, what are your thoughts on candidates preparing visual presentations of themselves? I've recently seen someone advise to make a PowerPoint about yourself. Stef.
So most interviews are 1 hour that we do with the candidate, and while I like to know a little bit about the person, if they're doing their whole biography, we will not have time to talk about the project and about the way they work and all of that. And also during interviews, I really try to have at least 40 to 20 minutes at the end so that the candidate can ask questions about the project, because they also need to know if they want to work with us. So I would say PowerPoint about themselves. I don't know what they would put in that. If it's about how they work, sure, very interesting. If it's about their hobbies and all of that, it's like, yay, okay, but not maybe in the first interview, because I don't really have time for that. Also, I think it's very dangerous because maybe someone put something in there that is something very personal, and then you end up labeled as not being a cultural fit, which is kind of discrimination, but still. So I would say it might be a little bit dangerous. So can you be really yourself during the interview and reveal too much about you? I don't know.
Yeah, great point. I think that very often in interviews, one of the first questions I'm asked is, tell me a little about you. Now, they don't want to know, I was born in a small hospital in this part of this place. Like, they're not really asking that. They're usually asking, like, what was your career progression? And if I'm not sure, I'll sometimes ask. So in general, I'm not putting together PowerPoints about myself. I haven't put together a PowerPoint about a case study in a very long time. I usually go to my case study webpage and I go move through the webpage and I talk to that. And so in that sense, that doesn't have anything about Debbie the person. It's going through the job. And so I think the question would be, what are you doing? And I think that if you're just going to walk through the case study that maybe is on your website, you don't have to go into about you. You can say a little about yourself if you want to. If they ask, tell me about you. I can say, hi, I live in Italy. I have a super husband. I have 5 fun dogs. But like Stephanie said, I might not want to reveal anything that might make people want to discriminate against me. And that's sad. I might not reveal my age, or for some people, they might not reveal a religion or being in a marginalized group. So I would say, I don't think you should make a PowerPoint about yourself. I think there should be PowerPoints or web pages about your project. And you can always say a couple of words about your background. Let's see. Diana says, Steph mentioned one candidate was better prepared. Can you please elaborate what better prepared means? I often have a hard time preparing for questions I don't expect. What does a well-prepared candidate look like, Steph?
So we asked them to come prepared with something to show us how they work. I was like, you can, as David said, like some of the candidates just like show their portfolio, the website, and explained. And like, she basically had a very nice presentation that was explaining her latest project. She basically presented a case study that she didn't have in her portfolio. And so, yeah, she was kind of like, she did her research a little bit about the company as well. Meaning she knew a little bit what we were doing and all of that, so we didn't have to explain the business of the bank, which is always nice. So yeah, basically the way she presented the things showed that she did some research, and we didn't have that many questions at the end of her presentation, because she basically, most of the questions that we had about how does she work in Agile, for instance, what is her process, things like that, how did she recruit users, all of that were already in her presentation. So maybe it was like pure coincidence that she already kind of answered the question that we wanted to ask. But
That's what I
yeah,
was saying.
also like usually the questions are quite generic. How do you work? What's your
What's your
process?
process? Yeah.
Yeah, what's your process? Like, one thing though we often ask in interviews. I work for in a European institution, and there's a lot of tools that we cannot have. So we cannot have all the fancy tools like Google Analytics and the screen recording tools like A/B testing tools. Everything that is spying on the user, we cannot have. So there's not a lot of quantitative things that we can do. And I explained that to the candidate. Like I had like one candidate where I was basically explaining to you, like, okay, nice, you use heat maps, very good. We work with a high security environment. You will not be able to use all of that. Then he presented his work, and it was very, very weird because, oh, by the way, don't do that. He like took the public website of the bank and took one part that he decided was poorly designed and explained to us how to improve it. And we were like, okay, nice, but you will never work on that public website. You will work on internal tools. So I don't know if he was not briefed properly, but they all got the same brief. So, and then we were like, okay, so you explain your process. How do you work into a B2C environment? Please explain how you would work into a B2B. And he came back to all of those tools that I just explained like 5 minutes ago that he could not use. And my colleague was like, she sent me a DM like, if he says heat map one more time, I'm gonna rage quit. I was like, yes, that's unfortunately true. Like the candidate wasn't listening to what we were saying and wasn't able to bounce back. I don't think it's pretentious. I think he was kind of very scared. So I'm okay if he was stressed. I also think he had no experience in B2C. And then we discovered that he only had 1 year of experience. So I don't know how they were able to change the resume. And I thought he had at least 4 years. So yeah, it didn't go really well for him. So that's the other example of not being prepared, is like not being able to bounce back. And if you interview for a job where you are going to work into an enterprise product and you know the users will be internal users, usually you know it up front. Maybe you can adapt a little bit your process, or maybe you can prepare an answer when someone will tell you, okay, this is a very B2C process. How do you adapt that if you have B2B users or something like that? So being prepared is really about understanding what environment you will work on and be able to like bounce back on the different answers that you can give.
Yeah, and I agree with Ana Lucia that trying to go into an interview and instead of talking about your process or your work or your specialties, you start tearing down the company you're meeting with and telling them why their stuff sucks. Really bad because you have no context. When I think about what. An example that I had a few years ago, I was interviewing someone for a senior researcher job, and we asked them an extremely common question, which was, what's your research process? And I think that another part of being prepared is just knowing that there are common questions you're going to be asked and being ready, not with a memorized answer or an answer you're going to read, but just knowing generally what you're going to say. If I say, tell me about yourself, have some idea of what you're going to talk about. If I say, what's your process? Have some idea of how you're going to explain your process. But this person wasn't prepared for that question. And when I said, what's your research process? They just kept saying, research is so important. We've got to use more research. Research is really important. And I was like, research is important. I'm with you there. What's your process? How do you normally approach it? Oh, research is so important. And I love it so much. And I've been so into it for years. Now, you can see this is someone who's enthusiastic and excited, and we can like that, but they're not answering my question. And that can make them seem unprepared, and it can make it seem like if they ever got into what was the role? Senior UX researcher, and I was asking them their UX research process. So to me, a prepared candidate has a portfolio case study ready to show, especially if we've told them that will be in the interview, and can just speak to their background, their specialties, their projects, their process, how they approach things, and sometimes they get the curveball questions like, what's something that you would do differently now that you did in one of your projects or something like that. But when that guy couldn't explain his own process, then it got really weird because like I feel like we all live and breathe these things. We have some sort of order in which we do something. I think I even had someone in that round of interviews say like, process, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, you do things in order from time to time when you can. What do you like to do in what order? They didn't seem prepared to answer that. And so we did reject those candidates, and the overenthusiastic guy reached out to me later and said, I thought I was killing it. How did I get rejected? And I asked my manager, can I be honest with this person? And my manager said yes. And I said, we rejected you because when I asked you what your research process was, you did not answer the question. You told me how excited you were about research and how important research is, but then you didn't tell me your process. And that made me concerned that you might not have a process or you don't know your process. And it made me concerned that if you're ever in a work meeting and someone says, what's your process? You wouldn't have an answer. And the person was like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. I can't believe I didn't answer that. I'll make sure in my future interviews I'm better prepared for that question. And I thought that's a fair response.
One question we ask often is like, the stakeholder doesn't want to do that. What do you do? And the answer I expect is very easy. I don't expect a solution. I expect the candidate some form of try to understand why.
Right.
And I'm amazed at how many people go into I'm going to do that and that and that. It's like, okay, fine, but maybe like step one is if someone doesn't want to do something, you try to understand why they don't want to do it. So I'm always amazed because I'm like, this is the most cliche answer. Tell me why. Well, not like that.
Sing it.
But yeah, that's yeah, exactly. So I'm like, is it silly to expect UX researchers to be into, if I have a problem, I do not jump into the solution. I kind of like try to understand the problem. And I know like you're stressed is an interview and you kind of expect the people to, like, I think candidates think they are expected to give solutions. And I would say as a candidate, you are allowed to ask questions if you need more context, and you are allowed to answer things like, I'm not jumping into a solution. I do not have enough information here. I would try to understand why does this person don't want to do something like that. And I think it's very important for candidates to understand that, you are allowed to ask questions if you do not understand like what the interviewer is asking you, of course. And do not jump into like giving solution. Maybe like calm down a little bit and try to really understand the context.
Yeah, great advice there as well. And Ana Lucia is saying, is that person really a senior researcher? And they couldn't answer what their process was. Look, I've seen this kind of thing before. Many, many years ago, I was interviewing someone for I think, mid-level UX design position. And I asked them the same question. And I said, what's your design process? And now the answer will give away what year this was. It was a very long time ago. But the guy said, I open Illustrator and I start designing. And I said,
that's
well,
a process.
I said, that's a tool. Illustrator might be your preferred tool, but like, what's your process when approaching UX design? He goes, I just open Illustrator and I start designing. That's an answer, but it wasn't an answer that won me over. And I think the same answer today wouldn't fly if I said, hey, what's your approach to UX design? And you said, I use Figma. I would say, that's not a process.
I don't make fun of Illustrator. I used to do wireframes in Illustrator because then you can convert them easily into Photoshop mockups. So
I'm not
don't
look,
make fun
this
of
this
tool.
was Illustrator
No,
was
that's
still
making
hot
fun.
when this conversation took place, but it's just a reminder that that answer didn't fly 11 years ago, and the same version of that
Yeah.
answer might not fly today. Where if someone says, "What is your process?" the process is not the tool. The process is not, I open Figma and I start designing. There's a lot more to it. Okay, we've gone over an hour. Steph, any closing thoughts, or how can people join your mailing list or follow you or whatever you're up to nowadays?
You can find me on stephaniewalter.design, and in the footer you have all the links to all my social media and to the newsletter as well. I have a newsletter where every week I put some links in there. UX, design, some Figma plugin at the moment. I have tons of them. And then some fun stuff that have nothing to do with design sometimes. Like last week we were talking about a fish bell in Utrecht. So that was a fun one. Yeah, there's basically like a place in Utrecht where they have the fish cannot pass. They need someone to open a door for them, and the solution they found that they put a webcam underwater, and like if you see a fish in the webcam, you can ring the bell, and eventually when there's enough fishes, there's like a human being who goes and opens the little doors. I love that. I think it's amazing.
I'm surprised nobody's taught the fish to knock on the door. Okay, that's a wild one. So I'm going to start our closing background music. So thanks to everybody who joined live. This is also archived on YouTube on Delta CX Hive, as in Hive of Bees. You can always find episode 263 there in our playlist, and so feel free to share it out and or watch it again, and like it and comment it. Help us float there. Thank you, Steph, for being part of this fun adventure and for giving people some great advice. Everybody's thanking the Steph. And I guess I will just flame us out of here. Bye, everybody. Thanks.